Hello and welcome back to Death and Taxes, the weekly or theoretically weekly live stream podcast from the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I am one half of your hosting duo, John Humphreys, and with me as always now, I think that's fair to say, Gene Tunny. Gene, how you doing?
I'm going well, John. Lots to catch up on. It's been a while, but glad to connect with you, and we can chat for however long your internet connection lasts tonight. So yes, we'll see how we go.
Yes, regular listeners may remember we were going through the drama of selling and buying a house. Well, I have now moved house, different background, you may have noticed, but no proper internet at my new abode as yet. So we will see how long this lasts. So apologies if it doesn't last, but all we can do is try. So this is, as usual, being simulcast to YouTube, to Facebook, and to X. Please, wherever you're watching it, give it a like, give us a follow, give it a share, whichever social media you're watching us on. Please also consider going to those other social medias, finding us there, finding the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, John Humphreys and Gene Tunny, 3 different people to find, or 3 different names to find, and giving us a follow on all those places. It helps to sort of spread the love, spread the algorithm, attack the algorithm, and get more people to come in and hear what we're doing. We also do, this is live, and for those people watching along at home, we're happy to take comments, questions, criticisms, and jump down whatever interesting rabbit hole you may throw our way as we're going. So feel free to put in those comments. With all of that being said, I think the best place to start, Gene, is we still need a good name for this segment, but Gene's data dump. You might want to upload those to the StreamYard.
Oh, I've got to upload them. Okay.
Well, if you want to be showing them, yes. So they
silly me.
So that is, I'll filibuster while you're doing that. So one of the things that's happened, we haven't done this for a couple of weeks, my technology being the reason, so apologies for that. But one of the things that kept coming up, and Gene kept saying, well, we need to eventually talk about, and he was right, the wayward economic data that's coming in countries that aren't our own. So obviously we pay much more attention in Australia, but there has been some concerning economic data around the world. I mean, the UK is going through all manner of turmoil at the moment. You may have seen over I think 1 million people marching in London. I think a lot of that anger is about immigration, but I think the subtext of a lot of that is also the economic stresses. And if the British economy is to implode, then that's not going to help the social tensions in the UK. The French economy the French politics and economy, they often go together, which is why this matters more than a lot of non-economists think it matters. So the French are suffering problems, and the Americans perhaps doing a bit better, but the latest data coming in shows worrying trends, inflation ticking up, growth ticking down. That's not where we want to be going. And of course, none of this is Australia, but there are important lessons to be learned from what's happening overseas, both lessons to learn for what we should avoid, and also potential ramifications coming to Australia. So we'll dig into that. That's what I think some of the Gene's data dump is going to explore. Having said that, I will then hand over the reins to my fellow dissident, Gene Tunny. Take it away.
Dissident. Yeah, okay. Dissident in training, perhaps, John. Not as dissident as you, I'd say. But you actually think it was 1 million people in that march in London, do you? I see so many, or that demo, I see so many different estimates of it, and the official estimate's only a bit over 100,000. But it did.
I don't know if you saw those. That video is I actually think one of the more interesting things, at least from a foreign perspective, in Britain, this may have different ramifications, but from our perspective, one of the most interesting things was to see the massive numbers of people there that I think were unambiguously bigger than 500,000. I don't know where it is. And then to hear the media say, oh, look at that, 100,000 people. Whereas if you go along to a rally that the same media people support, you can see 20 people and their pet dog, and they'll say, oh, look, there's also 1,000 people there. It's the media bias, I think, is getting more and more noticeable for normal people. And it's just, in my opinion, going to exacerbate the distrust people have in establishment institutions. which then people decry. Oh no, we've lost trust. We've lost trust. Yeah, well, stop lying to us, and we won't lose trust as quickly.
Yeah, it was quite extraordinary. I mean, the numbers just blew me away when I saw the photos, and they just kept going over the crowd, and it just kept going. Like just a sea of people, just extraordinary. So, yeah, John, why I wanted to talk about this is, I follow a lot of the UK news, and it's just like lately I've been hearing all these things about how, are we going to have to go to the IMF again? So, famously, Dennis Healy, who was Chancellor in the 70s under Wilson and then under Callaghan, he had to go to the IMF to get a bailout, essentially, to help maintain the value of sterling. And I don't think they'll have to go to the IMF, but they're certainly in a lot of trouble. It's so very concerning data coming out of the UK, particularly very sluggish growth. So they had a technical recession a couple of years ago. They're not in recession, but they're growing very sluggishly. And we see that we have, basically per capita GDP has essentially stalled. So that's the chart I've got up there of the UK per capita GDP, their quarterly values. We see the big drop during COVID, and then we have the rebound. But it's essentially been flat since then. We don't have that economic growth. And so, this is feeding into that sense of disillusionment, the sense of a lack of opportunities, and it does lead to, it increases the likelihood that people are going to think, well, hang on, why, maybe, they'll look at, say, the asylum seekers, and they'll see the large numbers of people coming into Britain, and rightly or wrongly, they'll say, well, that's the source of a lot of the problems. So you can see how, the economic issues are feeding into that. So that's essentially the context, sluggish growth. And at the same time, the government just is unable to get control of the budget, very heavy spending, large deficits. If you move to the next slide, John, can I control the slides? Maybe I can.
Yeah, you have control.
I have control, right? So we essentially have. I am in control, like Al Haig in the White House in 1981. I am in control here. Yes, we see that the net borrowing to GDP. So essentially, the public sector borrowing requirement up around 5% of GDP. We see this in France too, 5 to 6% of GDP. The French government fell, in recent days because they know that they need to get through a very strong package of budget measures to get things under control, but that's unpopular, and government has fallen. So UK government, heavy borrowing, debt getting around 100% of GDP, a lack of confidence in Keir Starmer over a range of issues, particularly concern about the management of migration. You see social unrest, concerns about youth crime, knife violence. You see the protests outside the immigration hotels. All over in. Was it somewhere in Essex? There's one over in Islington, and not far from the city in London. It's huge amount of social unrest, and so you've got a government that has running large deficits, can't really, doesn't have any capacity to really do much to provide sweetness to the population. Essentially, it's going to have to increase taxes and risk becoming even more unpopular. They've lost the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, because she it looks like she was, couldn't fill out her stamp duty forms correctly, and so didn't pay the right stamp duty on a second property in Hove, I think it was, Brighton and Hove. All sorts of trouble. And how this is manifesting, when people started noticing and started saying, hey, they're in a bit of trouble, or, more trouble than was apparent before, is when the bond market, reacted very badly. And we're seeing this increase in the spread between the short-term rates and the long-term rates. So we've got those longer-term rates, particularly the 30-year bond rate, getting up to around 5.5%. You see that's that dark blue line there. So that's really spiked up. And what's happening is that, there's essentially the market saying, well, we're not sure about the UK government's ability to pay back this debt or service this debt in the future without resorting to the printing press or resorting to inflation to try and erode the real value of the debt. So the more debt governments get into, the more suspicious financial markets, investors, the bond market vigilantes, the more suspicious they get that the governments are going to resort to inflation ultimately to help reduce the real value of that debt. So, this increase in the yields and the bond rates, that's increasing their borrowing costs. That's going to have an impact on their budget. And that's something that's going to make it harder for them to get back in the black without increasing taxes. So they're in a whole world of pain over in the UK at the moment. And Peter Mandelson resigned recently. I don't know, the UK ambassador to the US over his connection with Jeffrey Epstein. Keir Starmer's getting a bit of a boost potentially from the state visit of Donald Trump. All of the theatrics at Windsor Castle you would have seen, but still, you have to wonder about the long term. His longevity as Prime Minister. It's very concerning. Any thoughts on the UK, John?
Yeah, well, I got to say, I think the UK is a picture of something that is happening to some degree or another across much of the Western world now. So it's firstly, these two issues are linked, of course, the state of the economy and the state of the books for the British government. Their productivity is slumping. I noticed that the first graph you put up, there's basically been no economic growth since before COVID. So the standard of living, GDP per capita, is the same as it was in 2019. So that's a 6-year stagnation, which isn't normal for the last 100 years in Western countries. And this is the same productivity slowdown that we've seen in Australia that is going on in much of Europe. And that is, I think, a massive part of the underlying story. Of course, regular listeners will be used to us saying productivity, productivity, productivity. But the reason we keep repeating it is because it's so bloody important. And it's a very big part of the story. Of course, low productivity flows on to both lower tax revenue to the government and higher spending pressures for the government, blowing their budget further out. So just by way of explanation for the non-economists out there, this bond yield we're looking at here, it's basically the borrowing cost for the government. So the government needs to borrow money when they have a deficit and when they're in debt. And when they do that, they need to pay interest. And if people trust the government to repay their debts and people believe inflation will be low, then the bond yield, the interest payment that the government has to pay is quite low. If they think there's going to be future inflation, or they think the government is going to struggle to repay the debts, then you see the bond yields going up. So this is why you see these bond yields going up, and people are predicting one of two things, or perhaps both of those things: higher future inflation or higher risk of not being able to fully repay the borrowing. So it is a worrying thing to look at. I got to say on that, in terms of solutions, if you just look at the fiscal side of things, of course, the easy solution to say, I don't believe they'll do it, is find some way to kickstart productivity. The same thing we're always talking about. And that can create a long run solution. The most direct solution, of course, is if the government is spending more than they get in tax revenue, either they need to spend less or tax more. And as you say, they could try taxing more, but they already have. I mean, I would say this problem is manifesting now, right? In the last couple of years, in the last, say, maybe 5 to 10 years in terms of the productivity slowdown and steady deterioration in budgets. It's manifesting now. But taking a bigger picture of this, government spending has been trending consistently up, basically for the last 100 years across the Western world.
Yeah.
Right. So And especially since the 1970s, when governments of various stripes discovered that they could give people lots of treats and free health and free education and free everything, and found it very easy to get reelected when they offered such things. And since that time, spending has been just steadily trending up. And then we've got a welfare state now that covers people in their retirement and more retired people, and that's both health and payments. So that is a big spending pressure, and taxes have been going up, but it's the simple solution to an uninitiated lefty is just, well, taxes need to go up further. I've argued for a while, and I think this is showing itself to be obvious in the UK and around the world. We've basically reached what they call the Laffer maximum. They've almost tapped out how much extra revenue they can get out from raising taxes. The UK now is suffering a problem of millionaire flight, right? There has been a spike in house prices in Milan caused by the number of British people leaving England because of the tax rates. The French government, who's going through their own crisis, is pointing at Britain and saying we need to avoid doing what they're doing because their taxes are so high. They're driving people out of the country, and they are losing tax revenue because of it. So there really isn't a solution here that involves higher taxes, unless you mean higher taxes on poor people, which, the really uncomfortable secret is that is a way to make more money. But how is that a solution, given that people are already struggling and it's not going to boost productivity? So I don't think there is, honestly, a tax solution to this problem, which creates a really tricky dilemma.
That's an interesting proposition, John. I mean, the UK, let's just think about it. They've got higher tax to GDP than we do. They wouldn't be as high as, say, France or some of the Scandinavian countries, would they?
No, but what you find is often the differentiating feature there between, and I've mostly studied this from Australia versus France, and France has a higher tax as a percentage of GDP, but that's mostly on poor people. France taxes low-income earners much more harshly than Australia does. And that is the one group where you really can get more money from. But what you find is these countries also then churn a lot more of that money back to the exact same poor people. So the Australian economy actually redistributes from rich to poor better than France does. But France does raise more money, and they raise it, the way they raise more money than us is they bleed poor people more, low to middle income people, they bleed them more and then hand it back to them, which isn't redistribution, it's just churn. So yes, it's technically possible to get more money, but realistically, you get that money out of the poor people, you're going to hand it back to those same poor people. I don't see it as a solution long term here. So look, they're going to have to face, there's only three options theoretically. One is to increase tax, and I would argue that basically they're tapping out of that option. They may try it. I think it won't work. I think they've already been trying it, and it already hasn't worked. So then they would either need a productivity solution, which is, of course, what they're all just hoping for, right? Our last chat with Chris Berg talking about their sort of AI and technology solutions, I guess that's what they're all just hoping and praying on. They're doing nothing to bring it about. They're regulating industry to the hilt to stop it coming about. But I guess everyone's just hoping for a magical productivity boom. But these same people don't seem to understand what causes productivity. So I'm skeptical there. Or they're going to have to get spending under control. It's the spending that's just kept going up and up and up. It's not the taxes have gone down and down and down. It's spending has gone up and up and up. And of course, the problem that Britain has there is that is overwhelmingly caused by their much loved inside their country NHS and aged pensions, right? So, and who wants to cut aged pensions or healthcare? And if you do, how do you get reelected? But if all three of those options can't happen, the problem seems insoluble. And I guess the spread there between the 1 year and the 30 year perhaps indicates that some of these bond watchers have noticed the projections for the Britain into the future on current productivity levels, which I don't trust, is that their debt levels goes from 100% of GDP, which I believe it's currently roughly that, to 250% over the coming decades. And if productivity slows down, it goes up to 750%. So yeah, it's hard to actually see how that's solved in a country where, of course, these economic problems and the tensions caused by the fight over immigration is causing such tense political fights, I think that who's going to actually help the other side do something unpopular? Like, who in this political environment will help the other side of politics, given how much tension there is in politics? Who's going to help them actually do a necessary but unpopular reform to the NHS? It is a mess, right? The situation we've got in since I would argue it all started when we decided to sleepwalk into the idea of ever greater government handouts. Don't worry, we'll pay for it later. And it kind of could sustain with the demographic makeup in the 1970s. We had lots of young people paying for the health and pensions of the old people. But I'm not the first to say this. I just don't see how that sustains.
Well, Gary Stevenson's made he's made himself a household name by arguing for a wealth tax in the UK. I don't know if you've seen that, John, but he's been agitating for that with some, very large demos. And there are all these, you hear these factoids about, 20% of the townhouses in Kensington are vacant at any one time because they're all owned by, rich Arabs or wealthy Russians. So why can't we just, have a really excessive property tax and soak the rich, so to speak? So now I agree with you. People are going to avoid that. It's not going to raise as much as they think. I don't think that's the solution. It's not going to solve a 5% of GDP deficit. But I would say that is becoming much more popular as a policy position. And I think we will end up seeing measures like that in the UK just because, Gary Stevenson is incredibly popular. When I was over there earlier in the year, the poster for his book was all, it's in all the tube stations. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do see some measures like that in the future.
Yeah. So the wealth taxes, they can come in a number of varieties, but if we're looking at land taxes, a very high land tax, one of the consequences of that is much lower land prices, which is great for people looking to buy, I guess. Although, of course, once they buy the land, they often can't afford to hold it because of the land tax. And that's why they need to sell it, which is what keeps the land price down. But if you've got a tax, X% tax, say 10% tax on land value, but land value is going down because of the tax, there is a limit to how much revenue you can raise that way. Now, of course, you can have a much bigger tax base by saying, no, we're not just taxing land, we're taxing all wealth. But then what is wealth that's not land? It's capital. So if you're taxing capital, that is often equivalent to a tax on capital income, right? So if you have capital, if you have $100 of capital and you're making 10% return, so you could say I have $100 of capital or I have $10 of capital income. So you could say, all right, you could have a 50% tax on your capital income, $5, or you could have a 5% tax on your capital, which is the same thing as a 50% tax on your capital income. Now, there could be a case for taxing the capital instead of the capital income in that it forces you to use your capital well. But realistically, it's going to create all of the same behavioral responses. The same flight you see from the UK is happening now. You'll still get that. The same behavioral responses, the tax minimization, the tax avoidance, all of the other things that people do to minimize their tax burden, you will see those responses as well. So they may shift from income to capital income tax to capital tax, but I don't think that's a silver bullet. I mean, if done well, it might even be a small little step towards a more sustainable system. It may be it's efficiency improving if you do it perfectly. But it's not a silver bullet, it's a tweak. And this problem, I think, is getting too big to be fixed with a tweak.
Yep. Righto. Well, we should move on. France, I think we talked about that. I'm not as deep into the situation in France as in the UK, but again, very large budget deficits and significant problems there. And I mean, eventually this will. I mean, this is why they can't do anything, because they know if they do anything, if they take the unpopular measures, there'll be a riot, or no one does a protest quite like the French. They're brilliant at it. They've got such a long history of doing it, setting up the barricades in the streets of Paris.
One little factoid is that the French bond yields are now higher than the Italian bond yields, which they've nearly always historically been lower because people don't trust the Italians. But I don't know if the trust in Italy is going up or the trust in France is going down. But that factoid aside, the comment I was making before about the political fallout or consequences from the situation is really highlighted in France because they've got a bit of a different electoral system there. And France has really split. I mean, maybe this is happening in the UK now with the rise of Farage. We'll see. But their politics is really splitting. They've got a shrinking centrist bloc, which are the ones who want big government but want to try and be fiscally responsible. Right? It's the Macronists, right? It's like Labour right, basically. Labour right. They want to keep the government big. They want to keep the government health and pension system flowing as always. But they can read these graphs. They do know there's a problem, and they are desperately trying to square the circle. But the issue is politically, they're losing support to both the right and the left. You've got the populist right in Le Pen over there, although Le Pen won't be able to run next time, but that her party. And they've got no incentive to try and save the political bacon of the centrists. And then you've got the left, which is getting more and more feral and less willing to save the political, the governments of these centrists, of these center-left types. So that's why their government fell. They said, the situation is a disaster. We have to do something. I'll put my government on the line. Can't you guys see the problem and help me do something? And the right and the left in France said, no, I'd prefer you to politically suffer. But what's the consequence there? Either the crazy left or the populist right then takes over, and then what? Can they solve this problem? This is what I was saying before about the polarization in politics. It seems to me to make it really hard to imagine how any political leader is going to get away with making the decisions that they need to make, which is, to me, again, just to repeat myself, and of course I'd say this, it's just this is all basically the downstream from LBJ and Whitlam and these 1970s hippies who decided that their government could just give us everything we wanted. And once they set us on that path, this is where we end up, and I don't see an easy solution, except for more and more protests. But I mean, it's not like those protests are protesting for less government spending. I mean, when that happens, they'll protest that as well. So then what?
Yeah, so John, I think the Whitlam government was 50 years ago, and LBJ was, longer than that ago. So, I mean, the government has kept growing since then. We can't simply just blame those two governments, but I do agree.
Well, I'm saying that the government has grown. The parts of government that have grown are the ones that those two gentlemen and their cohort put in place. Right? They put these policies in place. Those policies naturally grow, and whoever introduced the NHS in the UK, once you introduce these policies, which political leader can unwind them? But as we see now, somebody has to unwind them. And we could say, I wish we had a brave politician now. I wish we did. But of course, the brave ones all get voted out. We would have been much smarter to have not gone down this path in the first place, is my argument.
Yeah. And we'll come to this a bit later this episode. But I think we're in a situation now where, because of this polarization and just everyone sort of thinking the other side are acting in bad faith, I think both sides this can happen on both sides, but there's an unwillingness to accept basic reality in some cases. And we're going to talk about that when it comes to the announcement today from the Australian government regarding the emissions targets. I mean, in my view, just a case of wishful thinking or magical thinking about what they're going to be able to achieve. But we can talk about that later. I think there is this polarization is causing huge problems, and it's affecting our ability to reach a common ground, agree on what the core facts are, and to set a course for to correct things.
Yeah. To give them a little bit of credit, I suspect that is exactly what what Chalmers and Albanese were aware of when they called that productivity roundtable. Right. So it that seemed to me an attempt to try and bring people together, make them aware of the size of the problem, and butter them up for the fact that there's going to have to be some sort of action. Of course, their political needs to stay popular meant that everything gets so watered down and so minor
Yeah.
But I struggle to see it finding a solution yet. But I mean, it's the people in power at the time, they often get the briefings, just like you've shown us here for the situation Britain's in. And that Britain's making noises now about saying, look, we're going to have to wind this back, wind that back. And of course, then they get more and more unpopular and it bites them in the ass. But it's when you're in power and you get given those briefings, you get slapped in the face with reality. And then someone says, well, what do you do next? And you know what, they try, but unless they've got near dictatorial powers, like we've just discussed, the political situation means that no one's really there to try and, in my opinion, the greatest thing John Howard did, the greatest thing he ever did was not when he was prime minister. It's when he was opposition leader in the 80s and Hawke and Keating proposed some changes that I don't think were popular. And I think Howard could have got a boost in the polls by saying, I disagree with them. Various privatizations and deregulations that I think should have happened and did happen.
Cutting the tariff wall, wasn't it? Reducing the tariffs. I think you're thinking about was it in 88 or 89 when Hawke and Keating announced that they were going to end protectionism? I think basically that was.
Well, there was that one as well, which you would have got hay out of, but there was also a series of sort of wage constraints on the unions and some privatizations and some sense to try and control the amount of regulation on industry. And an opposition that was trying to maximize their position in the polls could have made hay out of that by just saying, these evil neoliberal economic rationalists, the words didn't exist then, but that's the version of that. And Howard, to his credit, and I think it's the greatest thing he did, including his time as prime minister, he didn't take that opportunity to make political hay out of that situation, and instead he backed it in. We see very little of that these days. An opposition leader willing to say, look, I could get you politically by opposing you on this, but you know what? You're doing the right thing, so I'm just going to wave that through. Congratulations, well done. It's rare, very rare to see that in politics these days.
Well, Turnbull was doing that on the emissions trading scheme with Kevin Rudd, but it's arguable whether that was the right policy to support. So it depends on your perspective, John. You might say that Turnbull was showing leadership in that regard, not acting as the traditional opposition, but then it depends on what your position on whether it was wise for that to have that policy in the first place.
I guess if that's his genuine principle, then that is a good example of that leadership. I think it's the wrong principle and the wrong policy. So that was an unfortunate example.
Right. Yeah. But he was one of those leaders who did seem to have some element of courage. He could be fierce in his time. So interesting character. But I
think he could have gone down in history very differently if he'd chosen to focus on different policy areas. I think it's unfortunate that the climate area is one that he got known for, because I think if he'd focused on education policy or income tax or corporate taxes, I think he was better than average on those issues. And if he'd thrown all of his political efforts into there, I think his political legacy right now would be very different.
Yep, very possible. Righto, shall we move on to the US now? John, you wanted to talk about the US, and we see the Federal Reserve, it's cut the federal funds rate. Now, we're getting these mixed signals out of the states, aren't we? We've seen that the tariffs have had an impact on inflation, or they're pushing up prices. So I guess to an extent that will just be a temporary impact. We've had CPI tick back up to, I think it's up around 2.9 through the year in the States. So there's a concern about, is inflation coming back? At the same time, there is concerns about, well, hang on, how's the overall economy going? Are we at risk of stagflation? If inflation comes back, the Federal Reserve's cutting rates, and the economy slows, could we have this situation of stagflation? So, the US is an economy we, of course, have to keep an eye on, and I thought we should cover that as well, given the news coming out of there. Do you have any thoughts on the US, John?
Yeah, well, they've got the interesting issue of trying to work out what to do with their interest rates, of course, and they've got the added fun of Trump being quite bombastic in berating the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, about hurry up and cut rates, you idiot. And he's not very subtle about it. But I mean, I've got to some degree, you have to feel a little bit sorry for the situation that Powell's in, of course, because he does have a responsibility to try and keep inflation under control. Inflation seems to be stubbornly not going down to the level it's supposed to. That he's targeting. And of course, as you would know, I think they should target a lower rate of inflation than they even do. But putting that aside, the US inflation is staying stubborn. Now, that may just be a transitory element, as you say, caused by the tariffs. And so you do need to factor that in. I do think that the Reserve Bank in Australia and the Fed in America should be focused on the long-term situation and try to discount the transitory elements. But of course, it can be very hard to tell what's transitory in the moment. 10 or 20 years' time looking back, we'll know exactly the answer. But of course, we have to make the decision today. We can't make it 20 years in the future looking back. And so it is tricky. And then, of course, they've got their economy seeming to slow down somewhat. And also the debt situation, of course. The deficits in America now are eye-watering. The debt is astronomical. And they have the same situation that the UK and France and Australia, to a slightly lesser degree, have, which is this spending keeps going one way. The taxes aren't keeping up with it. America probably has some room to move in increasing tax, but I would argue the fact that they haven't increased tax as much as the Europeans have is probably one of the main reasons why America does have slightly better productivity numbers than Europe. And of course, as we've repeated often, productivity. So they're caught in a very similar catch-22, that their budget seems to be on a one-way trajectory to nowhere. And there's no hint, even with a Republican in the White House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House of Representatives in America, they were unable to cut much spending. Even with Elon Musk running Doge, it all came through, and then Congress got cold feet, and they cut spending by $4 and tuppence, which isn't going to be enough to get their budget under control. So long term, it looks just as scary as everywhere else, which brings me to the question. I'll throw this question to you first, and then is that the last slide, by the way?
Oh no, I've got some on our what's happened today in Australia, but
okay.
Feel free to go on.
I was just going to say, in terms of the impact of this, because this is all international stuff, the UK, France, the USA, and those aren't the only countries facing this situation. But of course, most people listening in here will be from Australia, and they would be saying, and why should we care? So what do you say to that, G? What does this matter for us?
Why should we care? Because I mean, well, it's part of the whole potential, this horror or worst case scenario of the collapse of Western civilization as we know it. Really, I mean, I know this is something we talk about. You know what I mean? I mean, we've got the two great, pillars of Western civilization, or of the Anglosphere, the United States and the UK, both with it in potential fiscal crises, both with significant economic problems, both unable to show the strong leadership that we had in the post-war period, and also, as the commenter has just noted, I mean, there is going to be a knock-on impact on the global economy if America does actually have a significant slowdown, the stagflation. I mean, that will ripple through the economy to a lesser extent than it once did, because I mean, China is much more of a power. Our economy is much to a large extent sort of tied in with China now rather than the States, but still there's no doubt that it have global repercussions. I think it's just concerning in that regard. I mean, what does it mean for global stability if the US and the UK falter? Also, it's potentially a sign of things to come for us, and it shows why we should be managing our budgets prudently because we want to avoid getting in that situation. We're lucky we started off with such low debt prior to the financial crisis. I mean, it's been heading up there, but basically we had negative net debt. We paid down all of the debt that they just kept. All of the debt they had $50 billion on issue to keep the bond market, so they can have prices in the bond market and benchmark yields. But we had essentially no debt, which has put us in a good position. So we still look very good. But if we don't manage our situation, we can end up in the situation like the US or the UK. And I think we want to avoid that, because what's going to happen, and this is what the bond market's telling us, those high long-term yields, people are expecting they'll inflate their way out of the debt. So, what people are expecting, and it's very possible we'll have a future government which essentially tries to pressures the Federal Reserve or the RBA to help it monetize its deficits, inflate away the debt. So huge concern.
Lyndon seems to very much agree with that point as well, and the indication of gold is often even if you're not interested in investing in gold, and I give no investment advice, but you should invest in gold. But don't take advice from me. Even if you're not interested in that, keeping an eye on it is a worthwhile thing to do, because it does give you a hint of what's coming. It has been a remarkably good long-term indicator. Not a great short-term indicator. It can make plenty of mistakes in the short term. But gold does track for the actual cost of living pretty consistently over thousands of years. Did you know the cost of buying a suit now, measured in gold, is roughly the same as the cost of buying a suit in the Roman Empire? So it's remarkably stable currency. So it's the rise in gold does show some concerns about the stability of the fiat currencies we're facing. But I can say, you look concerned with that, Gene.
No, I was just trying to work that out. But we can talk about. I think that's an interesting example. Did you just? Where did you find that one? I
didn't make it up. No,
that's interesting.
I don't have the reference here. Like they can't compare a lot of things, because the average purchasing bundle right now in Australia is quite different to what most people in the Roman Empire bought. So there's most things we can't compare. But there you go. That was one thing they were able to compare.
So the gold price is now $3,500 an ounce or something like that, isn't it? So I remember people were getting excited when it got up to. That's US, isn't it? I think they were getting excited when it got up to 2,000 an ounce. So I mean, it's significant. And it's actually, it looks like it's 3,668 gold price. Yeah, I mean, it's that'd buy you a very good. Yeah, so I wonder if people are just saying, well, in the Roman Empire, you needed an ounce of gold to buy a suit or the finest robes or toga that you could get.
I'm not saying it was an ounce of gold to buy the suit. I'm saying that if you use gold as the currency, it would have been the same amount of the equivalent amount of gold you use now. So take the price of a suit, convert it into gold, take that gold back to the Roman Empire, and with that gold, you could have also bought a suit. That's what I'm saying there. But anyway, we got a little bit off track. But I can say your second point on what we take from this, I think, is the real takeaway here. I don't think we're going to be too much impacted by the current fallout, especially in Europe. More so in America, except that it seems like America's funny antics about tariffs may end up helping us through trade diversion, because they're going after other countries more than us. And so I'm not too worried about the direct sort of kinetic impacts that you would normally worry about. But I think it is hugely important for two reasons. One is in terms of the lessons learned. And I've long argued that the trajectory, the makeup of Western countries with big governments, large welfare states, aging populations, and political sclerosis is destined for a bad ending. But Australia's great advantage is hopefully we have the chance to watch several other countries implode and immolate themselves. And we can learn the lesson. We can look at that and go, oh, I want to avoid that. That is going to potentially incentivize enough radical political change to be able to avoid the outcome that we'll end up seeing in those countries. So that's one lesson. The other potential fallout here to worry about, I think, is this action on the bond markets. If we currently the amount of debt in the UK, in France, in America, in Japan, in Germany, in everywhere, in Italy, in Spain, is, if you'd gone back 50 years and said that the debt was that level, people would have said, oh, so you're already in a crisis, right? Everything's already imploded. You've already got 200% inflation. You've already turned into like a Latin American basket case. But we haven't yet. So the risk appetite of bond investors has changed. The amount of money out there desperately trying to find a place to go and not knowing where to go because everything's a bubble has changed. It is not inevitable that this risk appetite will sustain. And if it changes, even if it had nothing to do with Australia, even if, as you say, our debt is far more manageable at the moment, right? We are not on the cutting edge of the problem. We're walking towards it, and I wish we'd stop walking that way, but we're not there yet. We're not at the edge. But if the risk appetite with bonds suddenly changes, it will change everywhere. There will be a sudden step change in how people treat bonds. And that's going to be kicked off probably in a different country, not in Australia. Right. And if that kicks off in the UK and then Japan and then the US, that we will not be immune to. And that might force a drastic realignment in the way we do our budgeting in Australia. Even if we wouldn't have done anything to deserve that, but that's something we should be worried about, people's attitude to risk in bond markets in general.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, John. I think that's, I agree. I think that's happened before. We have seen that in the past. There are historical examples of that correlation of bond markets, even though, I mean, we're not anywhere near in as bad a shape as they are. We've certainly got to get our house in order, but yeah, we could certainly be a victim like that. I agree.
Now, you said there was one last topic with a few slides.
Oh, well, yes. Yeah, well, you're saying that radical change is needed. I'm concerned that the radical change is coming from the current, the people we've got in power at the moment. I mean, essentially, it's hugely risky, this path that we're going on. We've got the government announcing that we're going to be targeting 62 to 70% reduction in emissions. This is relative to 2005. So this is greenhouse gas emissions, so CO2 equivalent emissions. We're currently probably around 30% down on 2005 levels. And this is this chart I've got here, which has the annual megatons of CO2. And as you'll see, I mean, we're sort of, haven't got my glasses on, but I think we're about 430 megatons a year. Now, bear in mind that the global amount of CO2 emitted is around 50-something gigatons. So, we're about 1% of, or under 1% of the global emissions. So, that's something we should be thinking about in terms of, our, what's rational for Australian policy. What's happened is that it looks like we're sort of flatlining around 28 to 29 or 30% below the 2025 level. Now, the government wants us to get to 43% by 2030. They've got some modelling that suggests that we'll get there. A lot of people are sceptical. And now they're saying, let's get to 62 to 70 by 2035. So, it basically means we have to, I think Matt Canavan had a tweet today which said that we have to triple or something the rate that we've been, double or triple the rate at which we've been decarbonising over the last 5 or 10 years in the next 5 to 10 years to meet these emissions targets, which just seems completely implausible to me. And it's based on this fantasy or this wishful thinking that we're going to take these drastic measures and cut emissions, and China and India are going to follow, because the US has given up under the Trump administration, but suddenly everyone's going to be inspired by our sacrifice here down under.
The geopolitics of the situation are so absurd, as we discussed, I think, last time. Anyway, previously on this show, we've discussed the geopolitics of it. And the only thing that matters, if you're fully invested in the world is ending, the sun monster is angry at us and it's trying to burn us to death, and so we have to placate the sun monster by taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. If you're fully invested in that narrative, the only game in town is global CO2 emissions, not Australian CO2 emissions. And so the best thing we could do is pass an if-then piece of legislation saying, if you do, we will. And that would be what would potentially, instead, I mean, it probably still wouldn't make too much difference in the world, but that is the only thing that could potentially add impetus to world action. And then it also would mean that we take the action if other people do, and we don't wastefully hurt our economy if other people aren't. So that's the geopolitics of this is always absurd. I'm convinced they don't care, right? This is a political issue. They need to be seen to be doing something. It's that old Monty Python skit. We must do something. This is something, so we must do this, which I think sums up a lot of the government realistically. And if you put to most of these politicians, what is this going to do on a global stage? They will dodge the question. And I think it's because they know that realistically, Australia's emissions aren't the game in global warming. And so then we've got this political need to be seen to be busy. And I'd say where this really ties into our previous conversation is like the only viable way through this sort of economic fiscal collapse of the West is realistically short-term. They're not going to cut spending. Taxes, I don't think, can go up. The only option was productivity. But this hurts our productivity. This is exactly the opposite of what you would do for productivity. So instead of a productivity action plan, we've got an anti-productivity action plan. This is going to be spending billions of dollars, mostly off budget, so that the politicians get to hide it because the media don't call them on it. But it's billions of dollars, like tens of billions. I'm underplaying it when I say billions. And then at the end of it, we've got, in addition to that, we've got all of these additional regulations on industry. They say they want to decarbonize industry. What they're actually doing is just deindustrializing, which achieves the goal they want, less carbon emissions. But that is not a productivity enhancing reform. So seen through the lens of productivity, this is insane. And like you say, it might be very difficult, but I think the difficulty of it is absurd. Well, not absurd. It's the wrong question, right? If we took seriously the economic danger that we're in, we would be doing everything we can to squeeze every last drop of productivity out of our economy. And yet we're doing this. So.
Yes. And the final chart I want to show is that the chart that illustrates how the big gains that we've had how we've got to 30% below 2005 is largely, not entirely, but largely at least, 2/3 to 3/4 of it due to essentially a reduction in land clearing and then so-called, carbon, all of this carbon farming or this locking up land and, not saying, oh, well, we're not clearing it. So we're actually now sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. So we've got, that's that blue line. That's what they call this. Now, this is a really bizarre abbreviation or acronym. It's LULCF. It's land use change and forestry. It's really bizarre, but that's where all the actions occurred. And you see that's flatlined. We're basically we're essentially plateauing there. And partly this is because of concerns. I think there was a pause in their carbon credits or their ACCU scheme or whatever it was. There were concerns over, the validity of some of those credits. So I think partly that's it. I think they've pushed the limits of that. The pink line up top, that's electricity. That's coming down because of renewables, but there's still quite a lot of way to go. And we know that as we get more renewables, that raises, there's the issue of intermittency. We need more storage, or we need more, we need all the poles and wires to connect all of these renewables in remote areas, and that's increasing costs. So higher power prices. That's just to illustrate the scale of the challenge. And we haven't done much on all of these other sources of emissions. So if we're going to have any hope of meeting the government's emissions targets, we'll have to do a lot more on transport and industrial emissions. And yeah, this is where the additional costs are going to come in and cause all sorts of, it's going to sap our productivity. Absolutely. Yep. Go ahead. I'm finished.
If we were in a situation of excess wealth and excess productivity and no social disharmony and no political antagonism in the country, perhaps we would have enough excess money to play this game. But this seems like a uniquely bad time, because also they would make the case that once you finish the energy transition, once you've finished it, the new technology is invented. Inshallah, knock wood, the new technology is invented, comes along, we fully transition, and then we can have relatively cheap, once we've spent the tens of billions of dollars and distorted our economy and regulated some industries out of existence, then we can get into a new equilibrium. And maybe there's even some truth in that. But that means we go through decades of pain at the exact time where the Western world is facing a runaway fiscal situation and stagnant productivity, and they're taking that productivity down even further. It's such unfortunate's the wrong word, because they're doing it on purpose, but it's such pig-headed misuse of the resources and the timing. And that you mentioned the areas they haven't made any progress on yet. They've got that in their plan, right? So they're talking about decarbonizing industry. That was the thing I said before. When they say decarbonize industry, effectively it means deindustrialize, because a lot of that's going to happen. The regulations they're going to put on layer on layer on layer on industry to decarbonize it is going to sap productivity out of those industries. We've already got a downward trend in sort of how much we produce in the country. That's going to be exacerbated by this. Their solution on cars is to get all cars being electric, and then it comes back to decarbonizing the electricity grid. So that's what they hope to see happen there. And look, and maybe that will happen at some stage. I mean, like the switch to renewables, if it happened naturally over long enough and it wasn't forced on us in ways that sapped productivity, might be a perfectly normal part of human evolution. But that is not what we're looking at here. This is not a natural evolution we're seeing. This is the government spending, billions upon billions and sapping productivity to try and artificially bring about something that is not going to noticeably change the weather. So.
Indeed. Righto. Well, that's the data dump done, John.
That just about, I'll put myself back on this side. That just about perfectly times the episode, though. We're coming up to 1 hour. So I think we'll take the opportunity to close inside of 1 hour. Thank you very much, Gene, for giving us all those discussion starters, as you brought up. For those listening, we attempt to do this weekly. I've been in the middle of a move lately, so we haven't for the last week or two. But weekly on Thursday evenings, normally at 8 p.m. You can find us on X, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Please, if you're watching, go to those social media sites, give it a follow. Look for the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, who produces this, and also go and search for John Humphreys, Gene Tunny on all of those mediums. Give us a follow, give this a like, give it a share, put it around the algorithm. We will be back next week if the internet gods allow us to. So until then, thank you for listening. Hope to see you next week. And Gene, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.